George Foster. Last June the 3rd actually, I will never forget this. I drove with my son-in-law from Burlington to Minneapolis over 2 days, went through Chicago, and the first day we made it to Minnesota, Dave was working, he had a 6-month fellowship at a Lutheran college about 40 miles south of Minneapolis, Northfield, down on the prairies, beautiful farmland all around. And I'm with him, and I had a former classmate of mine who I'd gone to university with in Minneapolis, and I drove up to meet him, had dinner with Bernie, drove out of the city, it's dark, and I'm on the interstate, and they routed us off and took us through a small town and multiple detours. I got lost, turned around, it got going the wrong way. It was night, there weren't street lights anymore, and I was out on some side road, and the car died, completely stopped. Now I found out later it was the fuel pump, there was no fuel, and it was going nowhere. But I'm standing there in the dark by the side of the road. Because I am terminally stupid, I did not have my BlackBerry cell phone. I'm terminally cheap. I said, I'm not paying roaming fees in the U.S. So I just left it at home. And I'm standing there by the side of the road now, knowing absolutely no one except Bernie in Minneapolis, 25 miles north of wherever I was. I don't have a phone. And there's about one pickup truck goes by every 2 minutes. And I'm just standing there with my 4-way flashers on, and I just said, God, what am I going to do? Literally. And about 30 seconds later, a car came by, pulled in front, and the driver leaned the head out and yelled back 7 words. Are you all right? Do you need help? And I ran up to that car. I'm telling you. I ran, and I'm leaning in the passenger side window, and I just started babbling. I said, I'm from Canada. My car broke down. I don't know where I am. I don't have a cell phone. And the driver said, he kind of looked and thought for a minute. He said, get in. And I got in, and we just started talking towards a solution, and eventually worked it out. AAA, tow truck, and I got the car to a GM dealer, and etc. But in the time we waited, I got talking to him. And at first, I'm thinking, why would this guy let this weird Canadian, like I'm a big guy and it's dark, he has no idea who I am. And I finally said to him, why did you stop? Why did you let me into your car? And he looked at me, kind of a half smile, and he said 3 words, the Good Samaritan. And I knew right away I was going to be okay. I said, you know the story of the Good Samaritan? He said, I've been preaching it for 40 years. So, George Foster, Methodist, missionary to Brazil for 25 years, now works as mentor and pastor to missions all over the world. And he's written a number of books. And as I got to know him, we've been emailing and phoning, and I've read his books. I said, I got to get George to Burlington, to Canada. So he's with us this morning. He's preaching tonight in Toronto at the Brazilian church there, and he's speaking here at a little conference tomorrow afternoon. And I am celebrating and thanking God to have him here now, but also how God brought us together. I wonder how God does these things. Is it just random coincidence? Because I'm out on a road, I could never tell you where I was. I couldn't take you there now again, ever. No clue. And he drove by. And he drove by, he told me after, he went by the other way, saw my car stopped, and he did a U-turn and came back because he knew somebody needed help. So here I am, and here he is, and he's going to help us celebrate our anniversary.
Yeah, remembering the past. Some people like to preserve the past. I'm the eldest of 5 brothers. The fourth, his name is Bart. He's the historian in the bunch, and he knows all about clans and Tartars and all kinds of things. He can take you back and tell you the history of just about anyone. And he's the historian and loves to read history and tends to live there. And one of his favorite things is to sit out in the yard at night when the weather's decent. He just moved to Arizona, so it's decent most of the time. And he has a little pot out there where he sets a fire, and then his 2 dogs sit on top of him while he reads history. Let's talk about the past. Passage of time brings change, and more than that, it brings perspective. Because we can look back and see what's happened, see what we've done, see what's been done to us and with us. And a few little references to the past. This church has a past. You obviously do. It's a beautiful sanctuary. I'm so impressed by the stained glass and also by the practicality of the way the layout is. We've got a gym, and I was here for the meal Friday night, and that was, I thought, a great event. And it's a wonderful ministry. I really believe that if we want to reach our generation, that we not only have to reach them with the message of the gospel, and when we proclaim the message, we talk about God's character. But when we do loving things, when we meet felt needs, we demonstrate God's character. And one of my favorite friends is a Ghanaian missionary to his own people in Ghana. And one day when I was visiting him, he invited me to go out to a little village. And he said, we're going to be dedicating a well today. And he told me the story that when they went out there the first time, he talked to the village leaders, and he said, I'd like to start a church here. And they talked it over and decided they didn't want a church. Well, he waited a while and went back after about 3 months. And he said, I've got a medical team that's visiting, and they'd be glad to come out and treat some of your illnesses. Well, they were open to that. So they went out, and not only in a sort of a dry fashion, but making friends with the people as they went, shoulder to shoulder and all of that. They treated many of the illnesses, and they discovered that most of the illnesses in the village were due to the bad water they were drinking. It was bad water. They had a pond out there, and they used it for everything, drinking water, for cooking, for cleaning. They also let the cattle graze in the pond. So I won't describe the water, but you can imagine it from now on. And so now they said, we'd like to help you put in a well. And they said, well, we'd be glad to do that. And they didn't do it for them, they did it with them. They provided the equipment, and they provided some of the funds. But they worked side by side again, and they made friends with the people. Well, I had the privilege of going with them on the day of the dedication, and he asked me to bring a little message to the village people, which I did. Then we had prayer and got the pump going and water out on the ground so they could all see. And then, when it was all over, the village chief said, now we want to show you something. So they took us down a little path out into a clearing that had been roped off and was all set. And they said, this is for you to build your church. And they hadn't asked after that first time, but they had won their way into the hearts of the people. And I think they had earned the right to be heard. And I think the villagers thought the same thing. And since then, that was the first one. Since then, they've done 42 wells like that in different villages around Ghana. And in the last few years, have started about 160 churches. And it's just an amazing ministry, and I felt so privileged to be part of that day. It's good to take note of the past and to thank God for where the past has brought us. I was reading the other day in Numbers about Israel wandering in the desert, in the wilderness, and this came a little after that, but there was a battle between Israel and the Midianites, and they were out somewhere in the desert, and Samuel decided it was time to recognize what God had done for them up until that point. And so he set up a kind of a marker, and he called it his Ebenezer. And he said, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." And maybe we all have an Ebenezer or two or three or many in our past where we said, okay, the Lord has helped us up to this point, and then we went on. You probably recognize it from the hymn, "Here I raise my Ebenezer, hitherto by thy help I've come." Well, the old-timers remember that. And I realize when you bring the two services together that I'm talking to the millennials and those from the other millennium. And very delighted that it's that way. One time I was visiting in India and went to Calcutta, and I learned the story of a missionary there by the name of Mark Buntain. And I was impressed by what I saw. He had a large church that seated several hundred. Under the church, there was a basement, and they had about 8 rooms where people with different languages were worshiping at the same time. So there are about 9 services going on, one in the language of the people there, and then 8 or so down below. Then besides that, he had another building alongside, which was a school, public school from kindergarten up to 12th grade. And on the other side, there was a hospital. And all of that they had built. They had all kinds of ministries to the people in Calcutta. We saw where Mother Teresa had her place, but she got the publicity, but Mark Buntain got the work done. It was quite impressive. And but they told me that Mark sometimes would have lots of projects, but not have the resources to do it. And it could be a little discouraging. They said that his staff would notice when he was beginning to get a little discouraged. And they would send in one of the new employees. And the new employee would go in and say, "Pastor Mark, tell me how this all got started and how it grew like this." And then Mark would tell a story, how it began, and all of the different things that God had done, the different ways that God had provided, God had supplied. And by the time he got done telling that history, his courage had come back to him. He was ready to go, and the discouragement was gone. I often think that we need to look back once in a while and see things that God has done for us. There are things that I believe that there's no other explanation but God. How could this have happened? I think that my encounter with Pastor Orville was one of those. Was, how do you explain that? I go down the road and I get to the bottom of the hill and I'm going to turn left onto Highway 169, and all of a sudden I hear this sort of a thing in my head. I'm not going to claim it was a voice, but the words came to me, "Good Samaritan." And I kind of looked up and said, "Well, you got me now, Lord." And I went back to provide a little help to Orville. The past is important. We shouldn't forget it. We should be aware of all the things that God has done. And if we would take a little time and write down some of those things or meditate on some of those things, we would all be thankful that the Lord did this, the Lord did that. The Lord has done so many things, and the quality of God that it brings out is His great faithfulness to us. Great faithfulness. Well, the future is important too. We can't live in the past. I have visited quite a few countries, and I do speak Portuguese, and my bucket list I've been to 4 Portuguese-speaking countries, and my bucket list includes the other 5 that I haven't been to. But I thought it was very interesting when I visited Portugal for the first time that they took me around to museums, old castles, everything that was old of the past. And I came to realize that in that part of the world, the people tend to live the glories of the past. Portugal was a tremendously important country, and I've been over to East Timor, northwest of Australia, that was at one time a Portuguese colony. And they were all over the world. They were great explorers. Their past is glorious. And they keep harking back to that because today, in the world that we live in, Portugal is a very small country and perhaps not so expressive as it was at one time. So they tend to live in the past, all the good things that happened. And so you get tired of seeing museums and gravestones and that sort of a thing. But it's there. You can't live in the past. You have to remember it with great gratitude, but not live there. I like the statement of a man of God who worked many years here in Toronto, Oswald J. Smith. He said, "I want thy plan, O God, for my life. May I be happy and contented, whether in the homeland or on the foreign field, whether married or alone, in happiness or sorrow, health or sickness, prosperity or adversity. I want thy plan, O God, for my life. I want it. Oh, I want it." And sometimes we're afraid of the plan of God. I met a man who was preaching about total consecration. And in the church where he was preaching, a lot of the people were saying, "Okay, I need to consecrate my life to God, totally." But there was one woman he noticed was resisting, and every time he would talk about giving themselves completely to God, she would shake her head and just offer resistance. Finally, she talked to him. She said, "Pastor, I'm not going to do that. You want me to make a total consecration to God, and I learned that that's not safe." So when I was a girl, I went to school, and I noticed that the kids that didn't do well at all would have to repeat the year. They would fail the class. But I noticed, too, that those who were the most dedicated and those who got the highest grades, there were always greater expectations placed on them. And she said, "I think in the kingdom of God, if you're really bad, you go to hell. And if you're really good, you go to heaven. But no, if you're okay, you go to heaven. But if you're really good and you really give yourself completely, you go to India as a missionary." And she didn't want that. So, and I hope that you do have plans. I looked at your website and I saw all kinds of great stuff about your vision statements and your purposes and all of that, and I love them. I love the short statement to know God, to know Christ, and to make Him known, and that in few words really boils down to what the church is about. And I, for many years, have made a comparison between two statements that Jesus made. One is that when He said to Peter, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." And the words that stuck out to me were "I will build my church." Later He said to His disciples, "Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations." Do you get the thing there? You get the picture? "I will build my church, but you will make disciples." And I really believe that our great task is to make disciples and allow Christ to build His church. I think that's been done here. Many disciples have been made, and as a result, you have a thriving church. But that's a great goal. Well, I want to concentrate a little more on the present. I have a sign in my office, my man cave in the basement, just to the right of my computer screen, and it says, "Don't delay. It doesn't pay. It won't go away. Do it today." When Paul made his appeal for consecration in Romans chapter 12, he said, "I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service." And I find it interesting that when he makes an appeal to consecrate yourself totally to God, to give yourself to God, that he does it on the basis of God's mercies. Because there is that fear that if I do too much, it might get me in trouble. But he appeals to us that God is a merciful God, and he knows what is best for us. And he's a good God. He wants what is best for us. And he is a powerful God, and he can do what is best for us. And he's a loving God, and he wants to love people through us and give his best to others through us. And he's a faithful God, and we can always count on his word to be fulfilled. I love to count on the promises and the faithfulness of God. I've been in some unusual places. I think it's 52 countries so far, and I haven't got to my bucket list yet, but I will go. Mozambique will be one. Angola will be another one. Guinea-Bissau, the Cape Verde Islands, and also the Azores Islands, or as we call them, the Azores. And I found that I can trust God. Everything that happens leads me to believe more and more that I can trust in God. I think if my life has a message, it's that if God calls and you obey, that he will provide and he will make a way. And he has done that for me. I remember when I was 16 years old and I was really sort of fighting with the Lord. I was involved in church, the president of the Young People's Society, but I wasn't living a Christian life. And if I were to tell my story, I'd have to tell a little bit of my dad's story, because his father was very tough and rough, and he talked gruff and took no guff. And Dad ran away from home at the age of 15. He lived in Minnesota, stole a car, drove it across the state line into Iowa, was arrested. When they asked him his age, he didn't want to be sent back home because he was 15, so he said he was 18. As a result, he was put into an adult prison, where he stayed from the time he was 18 until he was about 25, I believe. Or from the time he was 15 until he was about 22. It wasn't a good place to learn to grow into manhood. But Dad, unfortunately, even though he had run away because his dad was tough and hard on him, he was the same way with us. But I didn't run away when I was 15. I waited until I was 16. And I remember one night I said, I'd had it, this is enough, I can't do this anymore. Went out on the highway and started hitchhiking. A truck came by and offered me a ride out to South Dakota, out west of us. And I sat in that truck and the driver wouldn't talk. And all I thought about was, well, what am I going to do with my life? I'm too young to be doing this. Will I ever be able to get back into school somewhere? But the worst thing was I kept thinking about how this was going to affect my mother, and she didn't deserve to have her son run away. And so when we got down to the town of Marshall, Minnesota, I jumped out of the truck, got another ride down to my grandparents' home. Now, my grandfather was a retired minister. So I knocked on his bedroom window about 2 o'clock in the morning. He asked him to let me in. And I had my story all, you know how it is, it's on the tip of your tongue. Just go ahead and spill it all out, and you can tell everything you feel. And I was ready, and I started talking. He said, "Oh, don't worry about that now." He just gave me a big hug and kissed me on the cheek. He said, "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Well, okay. That was a Saturday night. Now, my grandma was about 5'2", maybe the same in girth. And you didn't argue with Grandma. So Sunday morning, she came into the bedroom, and I could smell the breakfast on, pancakes and bacon and eggs and all of that. I hope that's not making you hungry. But Grandma came in and she said, "Well, it's Sunday today. We're going to church." I don't know. Because I really had a problem with church. I was trying to be the president of the young people, but I did not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And sometimes I'd have to get up and say a prayer or even give a little talk, and it wasn't coming from the heart. It was just coming from things I was learning. And so, but I knew I had to go. And so we went in, and it was a little Methodist church in the town of Walnut Grove. You may have heard of that little town. That's where the series Little House on the Prairie was filmed, or at least it originated there. So we walked into the Methodist church, and everybody was looking at me. I felt like a fugitive, and went and sat down. And you know how small town is, people know what you've done almost before you do it. And so I sat there and thinking everybody's looking at me. My cousins were wondering what I was doing there. And then the pastor got up and preached. And guess what his theme was? The prodigal son. The young man who left his home and went out to live somewhere else. And I thought, who told him? And then I thought, you can run away from people, from problems, from situations, but you can't run away from God. He's always a step ahead of you. He was always there waiting. I love the hymn that we used to sing years ago that said something like this, I sought the Lord, and afterwards I knew He moved my soul to seek Him, seeking me. It was not I who found, O Savior, true. No, I was found of Thee. And the truth is that He's always pursuing us all the time. Now, He doesn't maybe force His way into our lives, but He's there. He's giving us an opportunity. Sometimes I wonder, why do things go on for such a long time? Why isn't there change? Why isn't God take a more active part in turning society around? Because I feel like, as many people say, we're on the slippery slope and we're losing our morality and we're losing our spirituality. Why is God? It's because He's pursuing us, those who might turn to Him, and He has the patience to wait and see all of these terrible things happening. But I want us to go away with this. We've had a past, whether that was a good one or a bad one. Sometimes the most dramatic conversions are of people whose past is not very glorious. But sometimes the people who have the worst past have the best future, because they make such a dramatic change and such a dramatic decision to follow Christ, to do His will, to present their bodies as a living sacrifice, to be renewed in their mind, to avoid the traps of the culture. I wrote an article a while ago called, Who Will We Follow? The Changeless Christ or the Changing Culture? And I'm all for following the changeless Christ. He's here for you this morning. He calls you. He asks you to present your life to Him. If you've done that in the past, you know what a glorious thing I'm talking about. And if you still haven't done that, maybe today's the chance that you're hearing His voice and saying, yes, I will respond. I pray that God will bless you, whatever stage of life you are in, that you will know him. The purpose is to know Christ and to make him known. May God bless you as you seek to do that. Amen.